Hello Stoke community, welcome to a Starbase UGC video tutorial. This tutorial is going to be an introduction to the Foundry aimed at new authors, people who may be thinking about buying a Foundry slot or maybe going gold to mess around with the Foundry. I'm hoping to cover basically everything you need to know in a few different tutorials. I don't know how many parts, but I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible. But hopefully if you watch these tutorials and you visit and chat with us at Starbase UGC, you'll have cut the learning curve down substantially as you build your mission, get to know the Foundry, and get to know the limitations of the Foundry so that you know what kind of stories you can tell. Okay, so let's start. We'll create a new project. I'll call it my new mission. I should say this tutorial will cover a few things. We're going to take a quick tour of the Foundry. Then I'm going to teach you a bit about doors and map transitions, and then we'll end with a few comments on item placement. Part 2 will build a mission from start to scratch, and then the remainder of the tutorial series will build on that mission and introduce you to things like triggers and branching dialogue. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to give you a brief tour and some overviews of things that, really, these are things that confused me when I first got started. One thing that confused me quite a bit was the hierarchy of tabs here. And what I mean by tab is you have the project tab, then there's a story tab, map tab, etc. When I started messing around with the Foundry, it seemed like the way to go was to start with the project tab, of course. You put your mission name in, and then you put the description in. That's what a player reads when they're browsing community authored missions. They'll read a brief description of your mission, and then you'll want to tell them, hey, go here in this system to enter my mission. Then I moved to the story tab, and that's when it just got really frustrating, because what I didn't know then, which I know now, is that you never want to start in the story tab. You want to start in the map tab. And the reason for this is the story tab is basically it's a list of tasks. It's a list of objectives. And here are your different types of objectives. You can interact with an object, make the player kill a group of enemies, talk to a contact, which is an NPC, somebody you put in the map, and the mission becomes go talk to this person. A pop-up dialogue can follow a task. Say you kill the enemies, and then the princess thanks you for saving her, and you can do that through a pop-up dialogue. Or reach a marker. Out of all these, reach markers probably the most non-intuitive of tasks. Basically, a reach marker and a place marker correspond with each other. When you put in the map tab, put in a place marker, it's a circle on the map, and it's someplace that the player needs to go. So in the story tab, when the task is to reach a marker, you're telling it that that's the task, is go to this point in the map. But before fully explaining that, let's go ahead and create a map so that I can better explain that. We'll create a map, and you have a choice here. You can create a space map, a ground map, which is a planet exterior, or an interior, such as a space station. When you create a space map, you also have the option to create a custom map, where you start from scratch, put in your own planets, put in your own backgrounds. You can even mess with the stars' lighting, etc. We're not going to go into that. We're just going to use a pre-made map. So let's use the ALS system. Enter a map name. I'll call it Space Map. And let's go ahead and create a second map too. We'll call it Ground Map. And I'll just pick something random here. Forest Oasis. Okay, now you notice that there's nothing on these maps. On the space map, there's the asteroid and all the debris or whatever that's on the built-in space map. What you start out with here is a spawn point. That's where the player enters the map. You can put down a spawn point. You can also put down a respawn point. So if the player dies, they'll have a different place from the original spawn point to spawn. And then there's a ground map, and there's nothing on the ground map yet. So let's say that I think I have my maps down, and I go to the story tab and I say, I wanna kill the Klingon. I want to kill some Klingons in space. So I'll say kill enemies, and I'll say kill Klingons. Waypoints, you want to leave waypoints automatic for the most part. These are little circles that appear in the mini-map. They tell players where to go. It's always good to use them, in my opinion, because you'll be surprised at how easily confused people get if they don't have waypoints. Okay, so kill enemies, and let's kill... Oh, there are no maps available that contain this object type. Well, that's because we haven't added any Klingons to the map. And that's really the lesson here about how to make missions in the Foundry. Is you start with the map tab, put your enemies in the map, put the objects in the map, put the place marker in the map. See a little circle? So if it's go here, then the task becomes for the player to reach the circle. You have to put these things in the map in order to specify what to do in the story tab. So let's go ahead and put some Klingons in space. Now you'll notice there was my special tab. These things correspond with stuff in the story tab, the objectives. Then you can add planets, other details like anomalies, space stations, etc. You can put in an NPC contact. When you put in an NPC contact, it's just a single ship or a single person. And you can animate them, but there's really not much else you can do with them besides talk to them. They won't fight you. They won't... There are limited uses with an NPC contact, but they're still useful. But if we want to put enemies in, we'll go to NPC groups. That's the difference between an NPC contact and an NPC groups. Groups will fight. Groups will fight each other, too. So let's say you put Feds and you put Borg in the same map. They're going to fight each other, regardless of what you do, because they're enemies. Go ahead and pull this out. But we said we want to put Klingons on the map. So let's put Klingons. I'll search Klingon, and here we have from strongest to weakest. The weak, you might be able to get away with putting two weak enemies together in the same spot, but I wouldn't recommend putting more than one squadron that a player has to fight at the same time, because you have to remember that these squadrons scale up and down. So I put in a Cruiser 2 squadron. Notice all these little red circles, little red dots. That's the total squadron. I can move them about by using the gray push pin here. Or I can click on the individual ones and move them about. Now you notice there are, let's see, 7 dots here. This doesn't mean there are going to be 7 ships. It all depends on the level of the player. If somebody's playing your mission and they're very new to the game and they're flying a low-tier ship, there's probably only going to be one enemy that they have to fight, because having 7 would just kill them. But if you're playing with, if a vice admiral's playing your mission, there might still be one ship, but it'll be scaled up. Where this really matters is when more than one player is playing your mission. If, say, a group of 3 people play your mission together, then there's going to be more than one ship. So that's something to keep in mind when you're putting in enemies. Is you might test play it where you put 2 weak groups together, and you're like, yeah, that was pretty easy. But imagine what it turns into if 3 people at Vice Admiral level play your mission together, and those 2 ships turn into 10. It's something to consider. But anyways, I have my Klingons on the map now. I can go to the story tab and I can specify, hey, those are the Klingons to kill. Okay, and let's say that I want a something to do after I kill the Klingons. Let's let's go to the special, and we'll put in a pop-up dialogue. Just a little blue. Actually, no. Let's not do that. Let's put in a reach marker. And after I kill the enemies, I want to get to this specific spot. Let's put a planet there. Let's get a smaller planet. No, that's too big. Okay, maybe class M planet. Well, that's all too big. Okay. Alright, so here's the planet. And I have a place marker. I'm going to increase the size of the place marker. Let's try 50. That works pretty good. And we'll move it right about here. Okay. So then, let's say the mission is to kill the enemies, followed by beam to the planet, which is really just reaching a marker. They're telling the player to get within the vicinity of the planet to orbit the planet. And we'll specify the place marker. Okay. And this reach text, once they reach the border of the marker, you can have it say something like we're within range, or etc., etc. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do to those maps for now. It's beam into the system, kill the Klingons, beam to the planet. Now let's go to the other map, the ground map, and I won't be able to transition from the space map to the ground map unless I have something on the ground. That's a mission objective. So let's do a talk to contact. So I go to my NPC contacts, and there's a large list of stuff that Cryptic has made for us that you can use. You know, everything from Gorn to Klingon. But I think I will create a custom costume. I'm going to create an individual NPC that fits with the story I want to tell, if I had a story to tell. So I'm going to call her Smelna, and we'll make her a Rigelian. You notice lots and lots of options here. You should be familiar with these if you've played STO and have created your own character, spend any time customizing the character. Another thing you can do is you can name her Smelna. That's her name over here. But I also want to name her Smelna so that she doesn't appear as a generic UGC contact. And let's say I want her to be a diplomat. I'm just going to randomize her till I think she looks like a diplomat. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I'll save. And now if I go back to my maps, oh, server not responding. Go back to the maps. Then in addition to the standard list of NPC contacts that I also have now Smelna. I've just added a custom character to the list there. So I can put her in, and now that she's in the map, I can go to the story tab and have a new task, and that task is to talk to a contact. Notice there's nothing in between this and this yet. This is telling me telling the player go to a point in space, and this is talk to contact, but we haven't specified who to talk to yet. So I'm going to say talk to Smelna. Automatic waypoint will show the player where she is, and then I am going to pick her. Okay, what that did is it conjured in a map transition tab, because we're telling the Foundry, okay, first we're doing this in space, then we're going to do something on the ground. From that point it knows, hey, you're going from someplace to another. Where are you going from? Well, we're leaving from the whole map in this instance, which is the whole space map, and we're going to have somebody tell us, this is usually your bridge officer, are you ready to beam down? Although that could be Smelna. I mean, you could specify Smelna, and she says, I'm ready to receive you now. And I'm going to say, are you ready to beam down? Yes. We specify the spawn point that happens on the ground. And then we can clarify the map mission name. Now, you notice when you play missions in STO, when you're on a map, on the right side of the screen there's these gold letters that say defend the complex, or investigate the ruins. It's some overarching task. And below that, in white text, is individual assignments. So let's say if I'm on the planet and my goal is to talk to Smelna, then I want to interact with an object followed by some other task. This overarching map mission name will still appear above. So let's call it something a bit generic, like investigate the scene. That way, whatever you're doing will still pretty much correspond with the map mission name. So talk to Smelna, and Smelna can say, hi, how are you? And one thing you might mess around with here is the advanced dialogue editor. Watch what happens on the left here. We haven't gone into the dialogue box yet, but if we click on advanced dialogue editor, that takes us there. And now all your dialogues in your map will appear in this box, but you can do many more things to them in the dialogue editor that you can't do in the story tab. For instance, instead of saying, how are you, she could say, what color is the sky? And you specify two different answers. You could say, blue, or you could say, red. And maybe one of these choices is wrong. So if you say the sky is red, well, you've failed her dialogue, and you'll have to do the dialogue over again. You can also do things like, depending on what you choose, she can say different things as a result. And we'll get into this more when we go through branching dialogue in more detail, but these arrows are also important. Say you make a wrong choice, you can go back up, or you could lead the player to go somewhere sideways in the dialogue tree. There's a lot you can do with these in terms of puzzles, but we'll get to that later. Okay, so here we go. I've gone from one map to another. I've told the Foundry that we're going from one map to another, and we have a new task on the map. But we haven't also dealt with this first map transition box, this first green box. The very first box that you see here, Grant Mission Dialogue, this is usually an admiral or somebody who tells you where to go. This next box is important because it tells the Foundry where the first door of your mission is. Now let me see if I can explain this in a way that makes sense. You have choices. What most people do is they choose a planet or they choose a system. So if your mission takes place on Andoria, you might create a snow-filled map, and then have the door to that map be the Andorian system. That's one way. That's really kind of the easiest way, is you can pick through the systems which planet you want to use as the door. But you can also pick existing NPCs at Earth Space Dock or doors like a dock at DS9. That means that the first place the player will go isn't the system to enter your map, it's that they'd have to go to Earth Space Dock or DS9 or Jerzana Station, and you could specify a contact that they talk with, and that would be a default cryptic list of contacts. I wish I could show you this more, but every time I click this to click on cryptic maps, it freezes. But if you click Earth Space Dock here, you'll find a number of doors. Also, if you make the first mission objective to talk to a contact, you can specify a default contact at Earth Space Dock. The trick is, though, that, or I guess the catch of it all is, that's all you can do when you use the social hubs. If you use the social hubs, you can specify a contact that Cryptic made for you to use. You can specify a door that Cryptic made for you to use, but you can't do anything else. You can't add objects to Deep Space Nine. You can't add custom characters. It's really just a way for the player to enter your mission from an existing Cryptic map. And it doesn't involve flying through sector space. So investigate that further. I wish I could show you in more detail, but it keeps crashing every time I do it. Anyways, let's move on. So that's the basis of doors and map transitions. When it comes down to build your maps. Build your maps first, put stuff on your maps, have a rough idea of what you want the player to do, and then go to the story tab and lay out the tasks. And once you specify something happening one place is followed by something happening on another place, then you'll get this map transition tab where you can specify where you're leaving from, who tells you that you're going, and then where you're going to spawn. Okay, so one last thing that I want to go over here is item placement. And there's no easy way to say this except just to say it. If you build in the Foundry, I mean, if you really take the time to look at all the lists of stuff you can add to the map and add walls, line the walls up, put tables in, create custom sets, you're going to switch between the editor and the playtest of your map hundreds of times at least, because there's just no way around it. It's a two-dimensional editor and you're dealing with three-dimensional space, so when you put down stuff, you really just have to playtest the map. And once you playtest the map, then you'll see, okay, that's not lined up right. You'll go back into the editor, you'll move the wall or you'll move the floor a bit, then you'll go back into playtesting the map to see how it looks. It's just, there's no way around the fact that when you build in the Foundry, it's a fairly tedious process. But there are quite a few tricks that will help you. So let's put in a building block ramp. Okay, there's the ramp. You get an icon of what the ramp is. You have the ability to kind of move this about by yourself here, but really, once you put an object in a map, it's best not to use this kind of drag and drop tool, because it'll always be imprecise unless you're just, putting an NPC contact down and it doesn't really matter where he stands. But when it comes to lining up consoles or putting walls up or building steps, etc., you really want to understand how X, Y, and Z coordinates work. Okay, so X, Y, and Z. The X goes left to right on your screen. The Z goes up and down on your screen. And this is when you're looking down upon the map, right? We have a bird's eye view. So when I move something up on the X, say 345, it moves to the right. If I move something down the X, say 335, it moves to the left. And that's because, think of a spot on the map where the coordinates are just 0. If you go, say, the very middle of the map, say this is coordinate 0, 0. If you go positive on the X, it's going to go above the 0. If you go negative on the X, it'll go below the 0. Likewise with the Z, if you manually edit the Z and you go up, so from 252 to 260, the object goes up, at least on your two-dimensional view of what's going on. It doesn't go up in the map as far as raising from the ground. It just goes up in your viewpoint here. I know that's kind of confusing, but we're dealing with X, Y, and Z in a two-dimensional top-down view, so it's easier to think about it that way, where it's, if it goes negative, it goes to the left. If it goes positive, it goes to the right. If it goes positive on the Z-axis, which is up and down, it'll go up. Goes negative on the Z, it'll go down, at least according to our two-dimensional view here. The Y, okay, notice the Y. If I change the value on the Y to, say, 50, nothing happens according to the two-dimensional view I have from the top down. And that's because this Y value is the actual height of the object in three-dimensional space. So it doesn't seem like anything changed, but in reality it just leapt way up into the sky. It's just you can't notice that that did anything because you're looking at it from the top down. So definitely mess around with this before you really get going. The better you get at manually editing the X, Y, and Z coordinates, the better you'll be with the Foundry, and the easier it will be to build. Also, there's this Y relative to. Y relative to the terrain and Y relative to 0 altitude are different things. When it's relative to the terrain, imagine there's a slope. If something in the Foundry has a value of 5 off the ground, then it's going to be 5 off the ground, say maybe, just imagine 5 feet off the ground at the top of the mountain and 5 feet off the ground at the bottom of the mountain, if Y is relative to the terrain. So you could have one object on the top of a mountain that's 5 and one at the bottom of the mountain that's 5. They both have the same Y value, but when you're in three-dimensional space, one is far higher than the other because it's all relative to the height of the terrain that's underneath the object. If Y is relative to a 0 altitude, that means both those objects are going to be at the exact same level, regardless of what the terrain is. That might mean that if both of the objects are set to Y, one might be underneath the mountain and one visible because they're in different spots, but they're in the same Y coordinate relative to 0 universal altitude. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to cover a lot of ground with this, and we're reaching the half-hour mark. Mess around with the Foundry. Experiment with some of the tools that I've showed you. Try to build something. Just try to build something and see what's frustrating about it, see what's useful about it, and mess around a bit before you watch part 2. Okay, thank you very much.